That day, while the world outside seemed to move in its usual rhythm, I was caught in a moment that would change everything. I thought I was alone, savoring the peace in my small suburban home, but I didn't realize my nephew, Ethan, was watching. His eyes, sharp and unreadable, caught mine as I turned, my hands still damp from washing dishes. That look, it stopped me cold. What followed was something I could never have anticipated. The evening had started quietly enough. My sister's son, Ethan, was staying with me while she traveled for work. At 20, he was mature beyond his years, juggling college and work, but still carried a boyish charm. That night, he'd gone upstairs to work on an assignment, leaving me to my own thoughts in the kitchen. I scrubbed at the last plate, the faint hum of the dishwasher filling the silence. The house always seemed too quiet these days, too empty. My husband, Dean, traveled often, leaving me to tend to the house and, now, to host Ethan. The routine loneliness had become almost second nature, but tonight it felt heavier, a gnawing ache I couldn't quite shake. "Hey, Aunt Lauren," Ethan's voice called from the doorway, startling me from my reverie. I turned to see him leaning against the frame, his dark hair tousled as though he'd just run his hands through it. "Yes?" I asked, reaching for a towel to dry my hands. "I'm heading to Liam's to work on our group project. I shouldn't be too late." "All right. Drive safe," I replied with a small smile. He grabbed his bag and was gone moments later, the soft thud of the door echoing through the empty house. And then, silence. I sighed and wandered into the living room, pouring myself a glass of wine. The cushions of the sofa felt comforting as I sank into them, the room lit dimly by the flicker of the television. The drone of voices on the news blended into the background as my thoughts drifted to the past. Dean and I used to spend evenings like this together, talking, laughing, planning for the future. But now, it felt like those memories belonged to someone else's life. The wine loosened my nerves, and soon, my thoughts took a personal turn. The weight of solitude seemed to press harder, and I found myself longing for connection, for anything that felt real. But just as I began to lose myself in the quiet moment, the sound of the front door opening jolted me upright. My heart raced as I turned to see Ethan standing there, frozen in place. "I forgot my laptop charger," he said, his voice unnaturally quiet. I scrambled to compose myself, pulling a blanket around me as if it were armor. My mind raced, replaying the scene to gauge what he might have noticed. His expression was a mix of confusion and something else, something I couldn't name. "Oh," I stammered, my voice shaking slightly. "I didn't hear you come back." He nodded, his gaze flickering around the room before landing back on me. "I'll just grab it and go." The moment stretched, tension thick in the air. He hesitated, then finally turned and walked back up the stairs. When I heard the faint click of his bedroom door, I exhaled shakily, sinking back into the sofa. My mind raced, replaying the scene over and over. Had he seen anything? If he had, how much did he understand? The following morning, the tension lingered like an uninvited guest. I busied myself in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for breakfast, my hands moving on autopilot. Ethan appeared moments later, his movements careful, his gaze avoiding mine. "Good morning," I ventured, trying to sound lighthearted. "Morning," he replied, grabbing a cup of coffee and sitting at the table without meeting my eyes. The awkward silence was unbearable. I set the knife down and turned to him, taking a deep breath. "Ethan, about last night." He froze, his coffee halfway to his lips. "Can we not talk about it?" "Ethan," I started again, my voice softer. "I mean it," he interrupted, his tone a mix of pleading and firmness. "It's fine. We don't need to talk about it." "I get it. You get it." I echoed, confused by his sudden insight. "Yeah," he said, finally looking at me. "You're lonely. Uncle Dean's never home." "I'm not blind." His words hit me like a physical blow. He saw through me, through the facade I tried so hard to maintain. I swallowed hard, unsure of how to respond. "Can we just move on?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Yes," I said after a beat, nodding. "We'll forget it happened." But deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. The day passed uneventfully, but Ethan's presence seemed inescapable. He lingered in the kitchen, offering to help with chores he usually avoided. It was subtle, but undeniable, the way his gaze seemed to follow me, the way he found reasons to be near me. By the time evening rolled around, the unspoken tension had only grown. I sat on the couch with a book, but I could barely focus on the words. Ethan joined me, sitting closer than usual, his proximity making my pulse quicken. "Need help with anything?" he asked after a while, his voice casual. I glanced at him, startled. "Since when do you volunteer for chores?" He shrugged. "Just thought I'd keep you company." I smiled faintly, handing him a pillow to straighten. We worked in silence, the TV playing softly in the background. But I could feel his eyes on me, lingering longer than they should have. "Is everything okay?" I asked, breaking the quiet. "Yeah," he said quickly, his ears turning red, a telltale sign he wasn't being entirely truthful. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me," I said gently, my heart pounding as I spoke. He hesitated, his fingers fumbling with the edge of the pillow. "It's nothing," he said finally, standing abruptly. "I think I'm going to head to bed." As he disappeared up the stairs, I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. The tension hung heavy in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. I thought the tension had finally begun to fade. We laughed at the cheesy one-liners, cringed at the over-the-top explosions, and exchanged knowing looks during the predictable plot twists of the action movie we were watching. For the first time in days, it felt normal, almost too normal, and that made the guilt settle even deeper in my chest. As the credits rolled, I glanced over at Ethan. His expression was thoughtful, his eyes lingering on me just a little too long, the same way they had the night before. That gaze, it burned. "What's on your mind?" I asked, hoping to diffuse the moment. My voice was calm, but my heart hammered in my chest. I shouldn't have asked, but the words escaped before I could stop them. "Nothing," Ethan said quickly, too quickly. His face betrayed him. "Ethan," I pressed, setting my empty glass down on the coffee table. "You've been acting different lately. Is something bothering you?" He hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands. I don't know how to say it without it sounding weird. My stomach tightened. I shouldn't have encouraged him, but I couldn't help myself. "You can tell me anything," I assured him softly, my voice betraying a mix of curiosity and unease. He sighed, running a hand through his hair, and finally said, "It's about the other night." The air around us seemed to shift, the weight of his words settling between us like a heavy blanket. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "What about it?" "It's not like I'm upset or anything," he said hurriedly, his voice low. "But I can't stop thinking about it." "About you." His confession hit me like a lightning bolt. The line I had been so desperate to preserve was now crumbling before me. My pulse quickened, my mind scrambling for the right response. "Ethan," I began, trying to maintain control, but my voice wavered. "I know it's wrong," he interrupted, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it's like, ever since then, I see you differently." The tension was suffocating, a magnetic pull growing stronger between us. He felt it too, the thing I had been trying so hard to ignore. I shook my head, trying to steady myself. "Ethan, this." "I shouldn't have said anything," he muttered, standing abruptly. "Just forget it, okay?" Before I could stop him, he had already turned and disappeared upstairs, leaving me alone in the living room with my thoughts. That night, sleep eluded me. Ethan's words played on a loop in my mind, stirring emotions I had buried for years. Guilt gnawed at me, but it was mixed with something else, a forbidden pull I couldn't deny. By morning, I knew I couldn't let this continue. I had to confront him, set things straight, and draw the boundaries I had been too afraid to enforce. I found Ethan outside, shooting hoops in the driveway. His movements were tense, his frustration visible in every bounce of the ball. "Ethan," I called, leaning against the porch railing. "Can we talk?" He caught the ball and looked at me, his expression guarded. After a pause, he nodded. I stepped closer, taking a deep breath to steady myself. "About last night," I began carefully. It's okay to feel confused sometimes, but this? Whatever you're feeling, it's not right. Ethan's jaw tightened. He bounced the ball once before holding it still, staring at it as if it held all the answers. I didn't mean to make things weird, he said finally, his voice low. You didn't, I lied. But we need to move past this. Your family, Ethan. That's what matters most. He nodded, though the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. I get it, he said softly, but the look in his eyes told a different story. As he brushed past me to head inside, his shoulder grazed mine. The contact sent a jolt through me, a reminder of the thin ice we were standing on. I watched him disappear into the house, a small part of me relieved, thinking it might finally be over. I was wrong. Later that evening, I was heading to my room when a soft knock at the door stopped me in my tracks. My heart leapt into my throat, and I knew, instinctively, who it was. Come in, I said, my voice trembling. Ethan stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He hesitated near the door, his presence filling the small space between us. What's up? I asked, forcing a casual tone. I just wanted to check on you, he said softly. I'm fine, I replied quickly, though my voice betrayed me. My pulse raced as I took a step toward the window, trying to put distance between us. You don't seem fine, Ethan said bluntly, his words cutting through the pretense I had been clinging to. I've just been busy, I murmured, still avoiding his gaze. No, you've been avoiding me, he countered, his tone laced with frustration. His accusation hung in the air, undeniable. I turned to face him, my stomach knotting. That's not true, I said weakly, but the words felt hollow. It is, he insisted, stepping closer. Ever since we talked, it's like you're pretending I don't exist. I'm trying to give us both space, I said, my voice rising slightly. It's what we need. It's what you need, he shot back. But I don't want space. I can't just ignore this. Can you? His words hit me like a tidal wave, threatening to pull me under. Ethan, I whispered, my voice breaking. This isn't something we can explore. Why not? He asked, his voice raw. We're both adults. We both feel it. His gaze burned into mine, and I could feel the weight of his emotions pressing against my own. My heart raced, my resolve crumbling under the intensity of the moment. Because it's not about what we feel, I said weakly. It's about what's right. And what if what's right doesn't feel right? He asked, stepping closer still. His hand brushed against my arm, the contact sending a shiver through me. I wanted to pull away, but my body betrayed me, leaning ever so slightly toward him. This conversation is over, I said firmly, moving toward the door. But Ethan blocked my path, his eyes pleading. Please, he whispered. Just listen to me. I can't, I said, my voice trembling. I can't stop thinking about you, he admitted, his voice breaking. Tears pricked my eyes, the weight of his words suffocating me. I shook my head, willing the moment to end, but the tension between us was unrelenting. Before either of us could say another word, a sharp knock at the front door shattered the silence. We both froze, the spell broken. I'll get it, I said quickly, slipping past him and rushing downstairs. My heart was pounding, relief and disappointment warring within me. At the door, I found my neighbor, Mrs. Callahan, holding a plate of cookies. Hi, Lauren, she said brightly. Just thought I'd drop these off. Thank you, I replied, forcing a smile. The interruption was a lifeline, but I couldn't ignore the fact that this tension with Ethan wasn't over. Not yet. As I turned back toward the house, I caught sight of Ethan at the top of the stairs. His eyes met mine, dark and intense, and I knew we were both standing on the edge of something that couldn't be undone. The weight of the night lingered like a shadow over my thoughts, a dangerous pull that refused to let me go. It felt as if I was teetering on the edge of a precipice, knowing the fall would be catastrophic but unable to step back. The air between Liam and me was heavy, charged with the unspoken tension that had been growing for days, weeks, maybe even longer. He stood in the doorway of the dimly lit kitchen, his presence both grounding and electrifying. His eyes locked onto mine, searching, questioning, daring me to acknowledge what we both felt. Liam, I began, my voice trembling, barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "I can't keep pretending," he said softly, stepping closer, his tone laced with urgency. "I can't act like nothing has changed." His words struck like a thunderclap, reverberating through me. I wanted to stop him, to tell him this was impossible, but my voice caught in my throat. He reached out, his hand grazing mine, and I felt my resolve crumble. "Tell me to go," he whispered, his voice raw with emotion. "If you don't feel the same, tell me and I'll leave." I opened my mouth to speak, to deny the feelings threatening to consume me, but no words came. Instead, I stood frozen, caught in the magnetic pull between us. He took a step closer, his hand brushing against my cheek, and I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by the tenderness of his touch. "You don't have to say anything," he murmured. "Just, don't push me away." And I didn't. What happened next was a blur of emotion, a whirlwind of sensation that I couldn't control. His lips met mine, hesitant at first, as though waiting for me to push him away. But I didn't. The kiss deepened, and I felt myself falling into him, letting go of every boundary I'd fought so hard to maintain. It was wrong. I knew it was wrong. But it didn't feel that way, not in that moment. His hands moved to my waist, pulling me closer as we melted into each other. The room seemed to shrink around us, the outside world disappearing entirely. All that existed was the heat of his touch, the taste of his lips, the raw intensity of emotions we could no longer deny. I pulled back abruptly, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. "We can't," I whispered, my voice barely steady. "I know," Liam replied, his own voice shaky, his expression a mixture of regret and longing. "But it's too late, isn't it?" I nodded, tears stinging my eyes. It was too late. The line had been crossed, and there was no going back. The rest of the evening passed in a haze. I sat alone in the living room, staring blankly at the television, but I couldn't focus on anything except the weight of what had happened. The guilt was suffocating, but it was tangled with something else, something forbidden, something exhilarating. When I finally went to bed, sleep refused to come. My mind replayed every moment in vivid detail, the way his hands had felt on me, the way he had looked at me with such unguarded vulnerability. I wanted to hate myself for giving in, but instead, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was out in the open now. The thing I had been fighting, the feelings I had tried so hard to suppress, were finally acknowledged. But what came next? The morning brought no clarity. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, my thoughts a jumbled mess. The sound of Liam's footsteps echoed softly down the stairs, and I braced myself for the inevitable confrontation. "Morning," he said, his voice careful, his expression guarded as he entered the room. "Morning," I replied, my own voice just as tentative. We sat in silence for a while, the unspoken tension stretching between us like a taut wire. Finally, Liam broke the quiet. "We need to talk about this," he said, his tone firm but not unkind. "About what happens now." I looked up at him, my heart sinking. "This can't happen again," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "It was a mistake." "Was it?" he asked, his voice soft but steady. His eyes bore into mine, searching for something, truth, maybe, or an admission I wasn't ready to give. "Yes," I said, forcing the word out. "We need to move on, Liam. Pretend it never happened." He leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening. "You don't believe that," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The days that followed were a delicate balancing act, each of us trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while avoiding the elephant in the room. But the tension was always there, simmering beneath the surface, waiting to erupt. One evening, as I stood at the kitchen counter chopping vegetables for dinner, I felt his presence before I saw him. He lingered in the doorway, silent and watchful. "Do you need something?" I asked, not turning around. "Yeah," he said after a moment. "I need to know if you really meant what you said." I set the knife down, gripping the counter for support. "I did," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He stepped closer, his footsteps soft against the tiled floor. "Because I didn't," he said, his voice low. I turned to face him, my chest tightening as I met his gaze. The intensity in his eyes was almost too much to bear. "Liam, you can't tell me you don't feel it too," he interrupted, his tone urgent. "I do," I admitted, the words slipping out before I could stop them. "But that doesn't make it right." "Maybe not," he said, taking another step closer. "But it doesn't make it any less real." The air between us crackled with unspoken emotions, the pull between us stronger than ever. I wanted to step back, to put distance between us, but my body betrayed me, rooted in place. He reached out, his fingers brushing against mine, and I felt the same jolt of electricity that had consumed me the night before. "This can't work," I said, my voice barely audible. "Maybe not," he replied. "But what if it could?" His question hung in the air, a challenge and a promise all at once. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that the line between us was gone, and there was no turning back.